Jake Morrison crawled out from under the twisted metal that used to be his scout ship and wiped blood from his forehead. 3 days had passed since the crash on this godforsaken planet called Kithara. 3 days of eating whatever looked safe and drinking water from muddy streams. 3 days of walking through purple forests filled with sounds that made his skin crawl. 3 days of hoping someone would come looking for him. The distress beacon had stopped working on day 2. His radio was dead. His emergency supplies were running low. Jake knew the Terran Defense Corps would send a search team eventually, but Kithara was a big planet, and he was just one man in millions of square miles of hostile wilderness. He had been trying to salvage something useful from the wreckage when he heard them coming. Heavy footsteps crunched through the alien vegetation around him. Jake grabbed his sidearm and tried to find cover behind a fallen tree, but it was too late. They had already surrounded him. 10 figures emerged from the purple undergrowth like nightmares made real. Each one stood nearly 7 feet tall with skin that looked like polished black stone. Bioluminescent markings pulsed along their arms and faces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They wore armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal and carried weapons that hummed with barely contained. Energy.Jake had seen pictures of Xyrelians in his briefings, but seeing them in person was different. These weren't just any Xyrelians either. The crimson markings on their armor marked them as members of the Crimson Guard, the most feared military unit in their empire. Elite warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds and never known defeat. The largest of the group stepped forward. This one had more elaborate markings and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Her voice came out as a low hiss when she spoke. "Human soldier," she said in accented but clear standard. "I am Commander Valthara of the Crimson Guard. You are trespassing in Xyrelian space." Jake looked around at the circle of alien warriors. Each one had their weapon trained on him. Energy shields flickered around their forearms. Their eyes glowed with an inner light that made them look like demons from some ancient Earth legend. Any reasonable person would have dropped their weapon and surrendered immediately. "My ship crashed," Jake said. "I'm not here by choice." Valthara's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Your intentions matter little now. You have seen our patrol routes. You have observed our defensive positions. You cannot be allowed to report back to your kind." "I haven't seen anything but trees and mud for 3 days," Jake replied. "Lies." Valthara gestured to her warriors, and they tightened their circle. "You humans are known for your deception. But it will not save you now." Jake felt exhaustion weighing down his limbs like lead blankets. His feet hurt from walking on uneven ground in boots that weren't designed for hiking. His stomach cramped from hunger, and his throat felt raw from thirst. Every muscle in his body ached from sleeping on hard ground and fighting through dense undergrowth for 72 hours straight. Commander Valthara seemed to swell with pride. As she looked at her elite soldiers, "Look around you, human. You are trapped. My 10 elite warriors surround you. Each one has killed more enemies than you have years of life. Each one carries weapons that could vaporize your entire body in seconds. There is no escape from this circle. There is no rescue coming. There is only surrender or death." The other warriors shifted slightly, tightening their formation. Jake could see the confidence in their posture. They had done this before, probably hundreds of times. They knew how this would end. The human would either give up or make some desperate attempt to fight. His way out, it would only delay the inevitable. Jake dropped his pack on the ground and rolled his shoulders. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through his tired muscles, but it also loosened some of the tension that had built up over 3 days of constant stress. He looked around at the 10 towering aliens with their glowing weapons and advanced armor and their absolute certainty that they had won. A grin spread across his face. Not the cocky smile of someone with a secret plan or hidden weapon. not the desperate rictus of someone trying to bluff their way out of certain death. Just the tired, almost relieved expression of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden and finally had permission to set it down. "Great," Jake said, his grin widening as he looked at each warrior in turn. "I'm tired anyway." The Xyrelians exchanged glances. Commander Velthara's bioluminescent markings flickered in what Jake was beginning to recognize as confusion. This was not the response they had expected. Humans were supposed to beg or threaten or try to bargain for their lives. They were not supposed to look happy about being surrounded by overwhelming force. "You do not understand," Velthara said slowly. "We are going to kill you." "Yeah, I got that part," Jake replied. He stretched his arms over his head and felt his spine crack in several places. "Question is, are you going to do it standing around talking, or are we going to get started?" One of the warriors took a step forward and said something in their own language. Velthara responded with a sharp gesture that made him step back. Jake didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. The soldier wanted to attack immediately, but their commander was still trying to figure out what was wrong with this picture. "Are you injured?" Velthara asked. "Did the crash damage your mind?" "Nope," Jake said. "Just tired of running around in circles for 3 days. Tired of eating berries that taste like wet socks. Tired of jumping at every sound in the forest. Tired of waiting for something to happen." He looked directly at the alien commander. "So, thanks for finally showing up. Now we can get this over with." The warriors looked at each other again. This human was either insane or he knew something they didn't. Either way, it was making them nervous. Nervous was not an emotion that elite soldiers were supposed to feel. Commander Velthara raised her primary weapon and aimed it at Jake's chest. The other 9 warriors followed suit. 10 barrels of concentrated death pointed at one exhausted human who continued to grin, like he had just heard the best joke of his life. "Last chance, human," Velthara said. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Jake shook his head. "Sorry, but I've got a policy about surrendering to people who are planning to kill me anyway. Seems kind of pointless, you know?" He looked up at the alien sky where 2 suns were beginning to set behind purple clouds. Soon it would be dark, and the temperature would drop below freezing again. He had been dreading another night of shivering in the cold with only his torn flight suit for warmth. "Besides," Jake added, his grin never wavering, "I could really use the exercise." The first warrior to attack was the youngest one in the group. Jake could tell by the way he moved, all eager energy and textbook technique. The alien charged forward with his plasma blade crackling to life, following exactly the kind of direct assault pattern they probably taught in whatever military academy the Xyrelians used to train their elite soldiers. Jake stepped to the side at the last possible second. The warrior's momentum carried him past where Jake had been standing and straight into the jagged remains of the crashed ship's hull. The sound of alien flesh meeting twisted metal was wet and final. 9 left. The others reacted immediately, raising their weapons and firing in coordinated volleys. Jake was already moving. 3 days of stumbling through dense forest had taught him every root and rock within 50 yards of the crash site. He rolled behind a fallen log as energy bolts scorched the air where he had been standing. What the Xyrelians didn't know was that Jake Morrison wasn't just another pilot who happened to carry a sidearm. His personnel file listed his specialty as reconnaissance, but that was only part of the story. The other part was classified so deep that even Jake himself hadn't known about it until his 18th birthday. Project Omega had been humanity's response to first contact with hostile alien species. When Earth's government realized that humans would eventually face enemies with superior technology and greater physical strength, they had started looking for other advantages. What they found was something that had been hiding in human genetics all along. Every human carried dormant genes left over from their species' violent evolution on Earth. Genes that had helped early humans survive encounters with saber-toothed cats and cave bears and all the other predators that had tried to eat their ancestors. Modern civilization had made those genes unnecessary, but they were still there, waiting for the right stimulus to activate them. The Omega Protocol was designed to trigger those ancient survival mechanisms. Soldiers who underwent the treatment gained enhanced reflexes, improved pain tolerance, and most importantly, the ability to enter what researchers called a berserker state, a condition where conscious thought gave way to pure predatory instinct. Jake felt the familiar burning sensation in his chest as his modified endocrine system flooded his bloodstream with combat drugs. His vision sharpened until he could count individual scales on the nearest warrior's armor. Time seemed to slow as his enhanced nervous system processed information faster than any normal human brain could handle. 2 warriors flanked left, while 3 more moved right. The remaining 4 held their positions to provide covering fire, standard tactical doctrine for suppressing a single enemy. They were treating this like a military exercise. Jake popped up from behind his cover and threw a chunk of twisted metal at the leftmost warrior. The alien brought up his energy shield to deflect it, but the impact sent him stumbling backward into his partner. Both warriors went down in a tangle of limbs and weapons. 7 left. The covering fire intensified as Jake sprinted toward the rightward group. Energy bolts seared past his head close enough to singe his hair. A normal human would have been dead 3 times over, but Jake's enhanced reflexes let him weave between the shots like he was dancing. He reached the first warrior before the alien could adjust his aim. Jake grabbed the energy rifle and used it as a lever to flip the 7-foot-tall alien over his shoulder. The warrior hit the ground hard and didn't get back up. The second alien in the group tried to bring his sidearm to bear, but Jake was already inside his reach. A knee to the solar plexus doubled the warrior over. An elbow to the back of the neck finished him. 5 left. Commander Valthara shouted orders in the Xyrelian language. Her remaining soldiers spread out further and began coordinating their fire more carefully. They were adapting to the situation. Jake had to give them credit for that. Most enemies he had faced either panicked or stuck to their original plan, even when it wasn't working. But adaptation took time, and Jake wasn't giving them any. He grabbed the fallen warrior's energy rifle and immediately put it to use. The weapon was designed for larger hands, but humans were good at improvising. Jake braced it against his shoulder and started returning fire. The difference between human and Xyrelian combat philosophy became clear within seconds. The aliens took careful aim and fired precisely placed shots designed to disable their target with minimum ammunition expenditure. Jake sprayed energy bolts in the general direction of anything that moved and trusted volume of fire to make up for accuracy. It worked. One warrior took a hit to the leg and went down screaming. Another had to dive for cover when a wild shot nearly took his head off. The remaining 3 found themselves pinned down behind whatever shelter they could find. 4 left. Impossible, Commander Valthara hissed from behind a tree. What manner of creature are you? Jake didn't answer immediately. He was too busy trying to figure out how to reload the alien weapon. The power cell interface was completely different from human designs, and he couldn't read the Xyrelian symbols that might have indicated remaining charge. I'm human, he finally called back while examining the rifle. We're the species that evolved on the planet where everything wants to kill you. One of the remaining warriors tried to circle around Jake's position. Jake spotted the movement and put 3 shots into the tree the alien was using for cover. The energy bolts didn't penetrate, but they turned the bark into superheated steam. The warrior stumbled out of his hiding spot with his hands over his face, and Jake put him down with a shot to the center of mass. 3 left. The battle had been going on for maybe 5 minutes, but Jake could feel his enhanced metabolism starting to burn through his energy reserves. The berserker state was incredibly effective, but it came with a cost. His body was consuming resources at an unsustainable rate, and soon he would crash hard. But soon might be long. Enough. Commander Velthara emerged from her cover with her hands raised. For a moment, Jake thought she was surrendering, but then he saw the expression on her face. This wasn't submission. This was challenge. Enough, she said. You have proven yourself worthy of single combat. Face me with honor, and I will grant you a clean death. Jake looked at the energy rifle in his hands, and then at the towering alien warrior. Velthara was bigger than her soldiers, and her armor looked more advanced. The weapon he was holding might not even penetrate her defenses. He dropped the rifle and smiled. Okay, Jake said. But fair warning, I don't know much about honor. Commander Velthara drew her ceremonial combat blade with a flourish that spoke of decades of training. The weapon hummed with contained energy and cast eerie shadows across her scarred features. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had killed more enemies than most people met in their entire lives. Jake picked up a piece of jagged metal from the wreckage and hefted it in his hand. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it had sharp edges and decent weight. More importantly, it was something his opponents wouldn't expect. You mock me, Velthara said, her voice carrying genuine offense. I offer you honorable single combat, and you respond with scrap metal. Not mocking, Jake replied, shifting his weight to the balls of his feet. Just being practical. Where I come from, the goal isn't to look good while you fight. The goal is to walk away when it's over. The remaining 2 warriors formed a circle around their commander and Jake. This was apparently some kind of ritual among their people. Sacred combat between worthy opponents, while witnesses ensured that proper protocol was followed. Jake didn't care about protocol. He cared about staying alive. Velthara began the formal engagement with a series of flowing attacks designed to test her opponent's skill and reactions. Each strike was perfectly balanced and precisely controlled. She was fighting like this was an exhibition match in front of judges who would score points for technique. Jake blocked what he could and dodged everything else. His makeshift weapon rang against her energy blade like a bell every time they connected. Sparks flew, and the smell of superheated metal filled the air. He was being driven steadily backward toward the tree line. You have some skill, Velthara acknowledged between attacks. But you fight without discipline, without honor, like a wild animal. Thanks, Jake said, ducking under a horizontal slash that would have taken his head off. I'll take that as a compliment. He feinted left and then dove right, rolling behind a boulder. Velthara's blade carved a glowing line through the stone where he had been crouching. Jake came up with a handful of dirt and threw it directly at her face. The alien commander recoiled in disgust and raised her free hand to protect her eyes. Jake used the distraction to close distance and slam his shoulder into her midsection. 7 feet tall or not, everyone had the same basic anatomy, and everyone could be knocked off balance if you hit them in the right place. Velthara staggered but recovered quickly. Her blade swept down in an arc that would have split Jake in half if he hadn't rolled away at the last second. The energy weapon carved through the ground where he had been lying and left a smoking furrow in the alien soil. Dishonorable, she spat, wiping dirt from her face. You fight like a coward. I fight like someone who wants to live, Jake corrected. He circled around her, looking for another opening. Honor is great when you're winning. Survival is better when you're not. The truth was that Jake's enhanced reflexes were starting to fade. His modified metabolism had burned through most of his energy reserves, and normal human limitations were beginning to reassert themselves. His movements were getting slower, and his reactions less precise. But Velthara didn't know that. All she saw was a human who refused to fight by her rules. Someone who used tactics that her training had never prepared her for. Jake grabbed another handful of dirt and made as if to throw it again. Velthara raised her arm to block, and Jake immediately changed direction, diving low and sweeping her. Legs. The massive alien warrior went down hard, her blade flying from her grasp. Jake pounced on the fallen weapon before she could recover it. The handle was too large for his hands, but he managed to get a grip on it. Energy coursed through the blade as he pointed it at Velthara's throat. "Yield," he said, breathing hard. The two remaining warriors started forward, but their commander held up a hand to stop them. She looked up at Jake with something that might have been respect mixed with confusion. "You have won," she said slowly, "but I do not understand how. You are smaller and weaker than any of my warriors. Your weapon was inferior. Your technique is crude. By every measure, you should have lost." Jake helped her to her feet instead of finishing her off. The gesture clearly surprised all three aliens. In their culture, showing mercy to a defeated enemy was apparently not standard practice. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous?" Jake asked, still holding the energy blade, but no longer pointing it at anyone. "It's not our technology, or our weapons, or our tactics. It's that we're the only species in the galaxy that evolved as persistence hunters." Velthara tilted her head in the universal gesture of confusion. "Persistence hunters? We're the species that killed mammoths by chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion," Jake explained. "We didn't have claws or fangs or poison. We didn't have thick hides or natural armor. What we had was the ability to keep going when every sane creature would give up." He gestured to the battlefield around them, where 7 elite warriors lay, dead or unconscious. "Your soldiers are incredibly skilled, better trained than most human forces, better equipped, stronger and faster and tougher in every way that matters." "Then how did you defeat them?" one of the remaining warriors asked. Jake smiled, though it looked more like a grimace. "Because you fight like this is a sport. Like there are rules that both sides have to follow. Like the goal is to demonstrate superior technique or courage or honor." He sat down heavily on a fallen log, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "Humans don't fight for honor. We fight to survive. And when survival is on the line, there are no rules. There's only whatever works." Velthara studied him with new interest. "Your species truly evolved on a death world, didn't they?" "Every world is a death world if you're not adapted to it," Jake replied. "The difference is that Earth never gave us time to specialize. We had to learn to adapt to everything. Ice ages and droughts and volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts. Predators that hunted us and prey that fought back and diseases that tried to wipe us out." He looked up at the alien sky, where the 2 suns were setting behind purple clouds. "Your species developed overwhelming force and advanced technology because you could afford to. You had time to build civilizations and perfect your military techniques. Humans never had that luxury. We had to learn to survive first and worry about honor later." The sound of approaching aircraft interrupted their conversation. Medical shuttles bearing Xyrelian markings were descending from the clouds, presumably alerted by some kind of distress signal from the patrol. Jake handed the energy blade back to Commander Velthara handle first. "Your people will want to know what happened here. What will you tell them?" she asked. "The truth," Jake said. "That honor and skill and superior training are all wonderful things. But sometimes they're not enough." As the shuttles landed and medical teams rushed to tend to the wounded warriors, Velthara continued to stare at the human who had single-handedly defeated her elite unit. "We underestimated your species," she said finally. Jake nodded. "Most people do." We look soft and weak and slow compared to the rest of the galaxy. What they don't realize is that looking harmless can be the most dangerous thing of all. The medical shuttles worked quickly to stabilize the wounded Xyrelian warriors, while Jake sat under guard, waiting to see what would happen next. 3 of Velthara's soldiers were dead, and 4 more were seriously injured. In any normal military engagement, those would be considered devastating losses for an elite unit. But this hadn't been a normal military engagement. Commander Velthara spoke at length with the medical team leaders and the shuttle pilots who had responded to the distress signal. Jake couldn't understand their language, but he could read body language well enough. Lots of pointing in his direction. Lots of animated gestures toward the battlefield. Lots of expressions that suggested disbelief. Eventually a new shuttle arrived, carrying someone who was obviously important. The newcomer wore armor with even more elaborate markings than Velthara, and carried himself with the kind of authority that suggested high rank. When he spoke, everyone else stopped talking and listened. "I am General Korthik of the Crimson Guard," he said to Jake in heavily accented Standard. "Commander Velthara has made some extraordinary claims about this engagement. I wish to hear your version of events." Jake looked around at the circle of alien faces watching him. Some showed curiosity, others hostility, and a few displayed what might have been fear. All of them were waiting to see what the human would say. "Your commander and her unit found me trying to salvage supplies from my crashed ship," Jake said. "Simply, they told me I was under arrest. I disagreed. We fought. I won." General Korthik's mandibles clicked in what Jake was learning was the Xyrelian equivalent of skeptical laughter. "You won. Against 10 elite warriors of the Crimson Guard, armed with nothing but debris from your wrecked vessel." "That's about the size of it," Jake confirmed. "Impossible," one of the shuttle pilots muttered in Standard. "Not impossible," Commander Velthara said quietly. "Just improbable. This human fights unlike any opponent we have encountered. He uses tactics that violate every principle of honorable combat." "Explain," General Korthik commanded. Velthara looked at Jake as if trying to solve a puzzle. "He threw dirt in my face during our duel. He used broken metal as a weapon. He struck wounded enemies instead of allowing them to recover with dignity. Every action was designed purely to maintain his own survival, with no regard for proper military protocol." "Cowardice, then," the general concluded. "No," Velthara said, surprising everyone including Jake. "Not cowardice, something else. Something we do not have a word for in our language." She walked over to where one of her wounded soldiers was being treated and gestured to his injuries. "Watch how our medics work. See how they follow precise procedures to ensure optimal healing with minimal scarring. Every movement is calculated and efficient." Then she pointed to Jake. "Now observe this human. Look at how he has bound his own wounds with strips torn from his clothing. Crude, ugly, but effective. He cares nothing for appearances, only for function." General Korthik studied Jake with new interest. "You suggest that human military doctrine is based entirely on practical results, rather than adherence to tradition." "I suggest that humans may not have military doctrine as we understand it," Velthara replied. "They appear to fight as individuals rather than as units, each one adapting to circumstances instead of following predetermined patterns." This led to a lengthy discussion in the Xyrelian language that Jake couldn't follow. From the tone and gestures, it seemed like they were debating something important. Finally, General Korthik turned back to Jake. "Commander Velthara believes that your species represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of warfare," he said. "She claims that traditional military superiority means nothing against an enemy that refuses to acknowledge the rules of engagement. Rules are for people who can afford to follow them," Jake said. "When your survival is at stake, The only rule that matters is staying alive. But without honor, what separates a warrior from a common criminal? The general asked. Jake considered the question seriously. Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the point. Maybe when you're fighting for your life, being honorable is less important than being effective. He gestured to the battlefield around them. Your soldiers are brave and skilled and well-trained. They fought with honor and died with dignity. My species would consider that a tragedy. We'd rather have live cowards than dead heroes. This statement caused another flurry of discussion among the Xyrelians. The concept of preferring survival over honor seemed to be genuinely difficult for them to process. Your people must be seen as weak by other galactic civilizations, one of the medical technicians said. Probably, Jake agreed, right up until they tried to conquer us. Then they find out that weak and defenseless aren't the same thing. General Korthik exchanged glances with Commander Velthara. Something passed between them that Jake couldn't interpret, but it seemed significant. We have received word that a Terran search and rescue ship is en route to this location, the general said finally. They will arrive within 6 hours. Until then, you will remain under our protection. Protection? Jake asked. Word of this engagement will spread quickly through our military hierarchy, Velthara explained. There will be those who wish to test themselves against the human who defeated the Crimson Guard. Others who will see you as a threat to be eliminated before you can report our weaknesses to your superiors. And some, General Korthik added, who will want to learn from you, to understand how a supposedly inferior species could develop such effective combat methods. Jake laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. You want to know the secret? There isn't one. Humans don't win because we're better. We win because we're too stupid to know when we're beaten. Explain, Velthara requested. Any sensible species would have taken one look at Earth's ecosystem and found a nice, safe planet to evolve on, Jake said. Ice ages and predators and natural disasters every few thousand years. Most intelligent life would have packed up and left. He stood up and stretched, wincing as his abused muscles protested. But humans are stubborn. We looked at every challenge our planet threw at us and said, we'll figure out how to survive this. And somehow we did. Over and over again. Even when survival required abandoning honor? General Korthik asked. Especially then, Jake replied. Dead heroes don't have children. Cowards who run away and live to fight another day do. Natural selection favors the survivors, not the brave. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another shuttle, this one bearing the markings of the Xyrelian Empire's intelligence service. The new arrivals immediately began documenting the battlefield and interviewing witnesses. Jake watched them work with professional interest. They were thorough and methodical, exactly what he would expect from a military investigation team. They measured distances, analyzed weapon damage, and recorded detailed statements from everyone present. They will want to understand how this happened, Commander Velthara said, following his gaze. My superiors will demand explanations that I cannot provide. Tell them the truth, Jake suggested. Your tactics assume that your enemies will fight. The same way you do. Humans don't. And if they ask for recommendations on how to counter human combat methods, Jake smiled grimly. Tell them to hope they never have to find out. The Terran rescue ship arrived exactly when the Xyrelians said it would. Jake watched the familiar angular lines of the TDS Redemption descend through Kithera's atmosphere and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. Home wasn't a place for humans. It was other humans. Captain Lisa Barnes met him at the shuttle ramp with a medical team and enough questions to fill a report that would probably be classified at the highest levels. She was a compact woman with prematurely gray hair and the kind of steady competence that made her ideal for search and rescue operations. You look like hell, Morrison, she said by way of greeting. Feel worse than I look, Jake replied as the medics started checking him over. But I'm alive, which is more than anyone expected 3 days ago. We picked up some interesting chatter from Xyrelian military channels on our way in, Captain Barnes said carefully. Something about a human soldier engaging multiple enemy combatants and achieving impossible results. Jake glanced over at where Commander Velthara was speaking with General Korthik and several other high-ranking Xyrelian officers. The aliens had been polite but distant since the rescue ship's arrival, as if they weren't quite sure how to process what had happened. I survived, Jake said simply. They're calling it impossible because they don't understand how humans fight. How? Do humans fight? Barnes asked. Dirty, Jake replied. We fight dirty, and we don't quit, and we don't care about looking good while we do it. The medical team cleared Jake for travel, but recommended immediate transport to a proper medical facility for full evaluation. The combination of combat stress, enhanced metabolism burnout, and 3 days of survival conditions had pushed his body close to its limits. As they prepared to depart, Commander Velthara approached the human group. Her manner was formal, but not hostile. If anything, she seemed uncertain about proper protocol for the situation. Lieutenant Morrison, she said, I have been ordered to deliver a message from the High Command of the Xyrelian Empire. Captain Barnes tensed slightly, but Jake just nodded for her to continue. Our leadership wishes to know if humanity would be interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations, Velthara said. There are those among us who believe your species could prove valuable allies, and there are others who see us as a threat that needs to be eliminated, Jake guessed. Yes, she admitted. Your methods of warfare are considered dishonorable by traditional standards. Some view this as evidence of barbarism that must be corrected. Others see it as innovation. That could be studied. Captain Barnes looked at Jake with raised eyebrows. First contact situations were supposed to be handled by trained diplomats, not crashed reconnaissance pilots. But the situation had moved beyond normal protocols. What do you think? Jake asked Commander Velthara directly. Should your people be worried about humans? The alien warrior considered the question for a long moment. I think, she said finally, that any species capable of what you did here should be approached with respect rather than hostility. Whether that respect leads to alliance or avoidance remains to be seen. She handed Jake a small device that looked like a crystal wrapped in metal filaments. This contains a complete record of our encounter, compiled from multiple perspectives. Your superiors may find it educational. Thank you, Jake said, accepting the device. For what it's worth, I hope our species can find a way to coexist peacefully. As do I, Velthara replied, though I suspect peace with humans will require us to redefine our understanding of strength. The journey back to Terran space took 6 days. Jake spent most of that time in medical recovery and debriefing sessions with Captain Barnes and her senior staff. The story of his encounter with the Crimson Guard would eventually make its way up the chain of command to the highest levels of Terran Defense Corps' leadership. More importantly, it would spark a fundamental reassessment of humanity's place in galactic civilization. The crystal device that Commander Velthara had given him contained detailed tactical analysis of the engagement from the Xyrelian perspective. Their military experts had studied every aspect of Jake's performance and reached some sobering conclusions about human combat effectiveness. Humans, they determined, represented a completely new category of military threat, not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because of their fundamental approach to conflict resolution. Where most species developed increasingly sophisticated methods of warfare, humans had retained the raw survival instincts of their predatory ancestors. The report recommended that the Xyrelian Empire classify humanity as a Class 5 civilization. Threat, the highest rating in their system. Not because humans were militarily superior, but because they were unpredictable in ways that made traditional strategic planning impossible. When the Redemption finally docked at Terran Defense Corps headquarters, Jake found himself transferred from search and rescue recovery to something called the Xenological Warfare Analysis Division. His new commanding officer was Colonel Patricia Hayes, a career intelligence specialist who had spent most of her service studying alien military capabilities. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," she said during their first meeting. "You've managed to single-handedly rewrite our understanding of human-alien military relations." Jake sat in the unfamiliar office and tried to process everything that had happened since his rescue. "I just tried to stay alive, Colonel. I didn't mean to start some kind of diplomatic incident." "According to the Xyrelian data, you didn't start an incident," Colonel Hayes replied. "You started a revolution. 3 different alien civilizations have reached out through back channels asking about human military capabilities. 2 more have quietly increased their border security in sectors adjacent to our space." She activated a holographic display showing a map of known galactic civilizations. Several regions were highlighted in different colors, representing various threat assessments and diplomatic relationships. "The Andromedans want to hire human mercenaries for their conflict with the Centauri Federation. The Vegan Confederacy has offered technology exchanges in return for military training partnerships. And the Xyrelians themselves have proposed a formal alliance based on what they call complementary warfare doctrines." Jake studied the display with growing unease. "They all think humans are some kind of super soldiers?" "They think humans are unpredictable," Hayes corrected. "In galactic military theory, unpredictability is more valuable than raw strength. Most civilizations develop standardized combat doctrines that can be studied and countered. You proved that humans don't follow standard doctrines." "Because we don't have any," Jake said. "We just make it up as we go along." "Exactly, and that terrifies them." Hayes manipulated the display to show tactical analyses from various alien military databases. Every major civilization in this sector has spent the last month trying to develop countermeasures for human combat methods. They can't do it because there's no consistent pattern to counter. Jake looked at the data streams and felt a chill. That had nothing to do with the office temperature. "What does this mean for Earth?" "It means humanity just became a major player in galactic politics, whether we wanted to or not," Hayes said. "The question now is what we do with that influence." She deactivated the display and leaned back in her chair. "I'm recommending you for promotion to captain and transfer to the newly formed diplomatic corps. Your mission will be to serve as humanity's military, attached to alien civilizations that want to understand how we fight." "I don't know anything about diplomacy," Jake protested. "You know about survival," Hayes replied. "In this galaxy, that might be more important." 6 months later, Jake found himself aboard the TDS Persistence, bound for the Galactic Council chambers, on the neutral world of Harmony Station. His new uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, and his orders were deliberately vague. Represent human interests. Maintain peaceful relations where possible. Demonstrate human capabilities. When necessary. The ship's captain was an old friend from his reconnaissance days, Commander Ryan Foster. They had served together on the Outer Rim patrols before Jake's crash on Kithara changed everything. "Still can't believe they made you a diplomat," Foster said as they watched the hyperspace tunnel collapse around them. "Last time I checked, your idea of negotiation was shooting first and asking questions later." "Times change," Jake replied. "Apparently the galaxy thinks humans are either the best potential allies or the worst potential enemies they've ever encountered. My job is to convince them we're worth having as friends. And if they decide we're not?" Jake smiled, the same tired grin that had started everything on a crashed ship in an alien forest. "Then they'll find out why humans are really dangerous." We're not the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest or the most advanced. But we're the only ones who look at impossible odds and think, well, this should be interesting. The ship dropped out of hyperspace near Harmony Station, where representatives from dozens of civilizations waited to meet humanity's first official, ambassador to the galactic community. Jake looked out at the massive space station with its gleaming towers and diplomatic quarters and felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settling on his shoulders.